Hey, beauty friends, welcome. I am Meredith Roddy from Beadalon and Artistic Wire, and I am so excited and a little bit honored to be kicking off the week of jewelry making that Michaels has going on right now. Fabulous classes, lots of instruction, lots of really cool things going on. So welcome. So glad that you can join me. And if you are watching on the replay, thank you as well for checking us out on the Michaels Community Classroom YouTube page. Oh my gosh, is there ever an amazing amount of resources, education, things to learn, things to be inspired by over in the Michaels Community Classroom on YouTube. And don't forget to check upcoming classes. I believe the website is michaels.com/classes, but Nicole can go ahead and put that link in the comments. Speaking of comments, if you are here live, please feel free to drop a little hello. It's always nice to see who is here and who is joining. I love seeing familiar names and new names as well. If you are new, please go ahead and introduce yourself so we can welcome you to our amazing beading community. So once again, I am Meredith from Beadalon and Artistic Wire. We make the wire. So when you go into your local Michaels store and you look on the wire wall and you see little spools like this is what we make. And we also give tons of instruction. We've been doing classes now for Michaels. Gosh, I think it's been 4 years now for the community classroom, and we're grateful for every moment that we get to spend with the beaders. So today's class to kick off, like I mentioned, the week of jewelry making is titled Layered Strung Bead and Charm Statement Necklace. Lots of words for a pretty big project. But one of the reasons why I chose this project is because it goes over a lot of different skills in one project. So we're going to be learning actually a little bit of bead weaving, if you can believe it, with wire, but bead weaving nonetheless. So if it's a motion, if it's kind of a thing that gets you jazzed, you might want to check out some of Danielle Wix's classes later on in the week. She's the expert seed bead weaver for Michaels. We're, of course, going to be doing crimping. That is the foundation for all jewelry making. We're going to either learn or perfect our crimping skills. We're also going to start with a little simple wire work. So a project that goes over three or incorporates three of kind of the biggest and the most important skills that you need to learn when you're making jewelry. We're also going to learn about opening and closing jump rings, using some chain to add length, all kinds of different skills. We're in here for the long run, okay? It's a pretty big and intricate project if you have seen the picture, and I'm going to go over everything in just a second when we turn our camera around. And Susie in the comments, she said, it is definitely a statement necklace. And in fact, it is a statement necklace. And this is what it looks like. This is what we're making today. So I mentioned we're going to be doing some bead weaving. And I mentioned that first because this is the first part. We're going to be building this frame that everything else is going to be attached to. So this is where the bead weaving comes, but we're using beading wire for it. We're also going to be doing some stringing. These parts right here are strung and they're crimped here and here. So crimping, the most important, and in my opinion, skill that you can master when you are making jewelry. And then we're going to be doing some wire working. There are a whole bunch of simple loops in here that are connecting all of our pieces and parts together down here as well. And then we've got some jump rings that are connecting everything together. And I mentioned also talking about using chain because my necklace doesn't go all the way around. It could certainly, but for a couple of different reasons, I really like doing about a 3/4 length of beaded part of my necklace, and then finishing it with either a chain or maybe a simple beaded part. But you can most certainly continue the repeats around if you want. But let's see, why did I do it like this? Like I mentioned, a couple different reasons. First of all, it takes a lot of beads. We're already using quite a few beads of different sizes in this design. And so when we're making our jewelry, we got to think economics, right? How many beads do we want to incorporate? How can we stretch our beading dollars further? Second of all, I think we're on second, I find it a little bit more comfortable to have something that's just one layer against the back of my neck. You might not mind. You might be okay with that. But just that little bit of extra bulk kind of on the sides and the back of my neck doesn't really do it for me. So that's the second reason. And third of all, I also kind of like how it looks with a little funky industrial chain, especially with the colors that I chose for my original sample of this necklace. So it's a little bit of the kind of the thought process behind my designing of this piece, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about what we need to make it. So let me put this aside for just 1 second, and I'm going to move into frame more beads than you need. Okay. So don't be alarmed by the sheer amount of beads that I have here. But I wanted to show this because this is kind of a little bit of the behind the scenes too. And I always like when designers are designing to see what's going on behind the scenes. So I'm going to move this aside for a second. We're going to get back to that. These 4 strands, and some of them only have 3 strands right now. This one's brand new, hasn't been cut. These 4 strands, 4 size bead strands at Michael's are fantastic. This is the part number for this guy, but these are great because they have 10 millimeter, 8 millimeter, 6 millimeter, and 4 millimeter. And we're going to need all 4 of those sizes for our project today. Now, depending on how you decide to color block or how you decide to place your colors in your design, you're going to need 2 of these. So either 2 of the same color, 2 contrasting colors, but the number of beads on just 1 card is not quite enough. And in the instructions, I actually suggested getting 3, 2 of one color and 1 of another color. And you can see up here, I just wanted to, I counted up to make it a little bit easier as well. For this project, we're going to need 48 6 millimeters, 30 come on the strand here. We're going to need 38 8 millimeters, but 24 come on the strand. We're going to need 23, not 15, 23 10 millimeters, 80 4 millimeters, and then we're also going to need 12 pearls or 12 contrasting beads. This, just for your knowledge, that's the part number for the pearls that I'm using. You don't have to use pearls. We can anything contrasty or not contrasty at all. We're also going to need some heart beads. I love these glass pearls, and you'll see kind of an interesting way that I incorporate them into the design. You're also going to need some dangles. I like to call them dangle-doos. Really more of a dangle-do when you make it, but we'll keep the name going. I have a dangle-do here and here and here, and you can feel free to go big or go home with your dangles or no dangles at all. But it's a really good way to use some of those really fun extra charms that you might have lying around, or a really beautiful focal piece for that you are looking to feature and haven't quite figured out the design that you want to feature it in yet. All right. Without further ado, I think we're going to get into it because we've got a lot of work today. And you can see here, I have the different colorway. I used both the gray and the black here, but here I did it just a monochromatic. I did it just with the turquoise beads. So you can kind of figure out from the beads that you have and maybe some extras that you want to incorporate what you want your design to be. Just going to throw my hair up really quickly. It is very toasty down here in the Beadalon studio today, and I've got the lights going hot. All right, so let's move this to the side. Keep that at the ready so I can reference it. Let's go ahead and get started. So the instructions, if you are watching on YouTube, are linked below, as the kids say. And then if you are catching us live, Nicole actually just threw those up in the comments. And of course, they should have been mailed to you or emailed to you as well when you signed up for the class. So for class today, I'm using 49 strand 0.018 jewelry wire. This is Beadalon 49 strand. It is our most flexible of the Beadalon bead stringing wires. Best flexibility. Of course, there's 19 and 7 strand as well. I'll be using some #2 crimp tubes because that's what the spool tells me to do. And then of course my crimp tool, which is the right one to use for the beading wire. And I'm going to cut about 4 feet of wire from the spool. If you have like 3.5 feet, you should be just fine. When I write instructions and when I teach, I tend to err on the side of too much material, too much wire to cut because I don't want anybody ever to run out. But I have found, let's see, where's my sample? With about 4 feet, I had about a foot left over. So like I said, you don't want to be, super up in there with your wire. But 3.5 feet, 4 feet should be pretty good. And I'm just measuring against my bead mat right here. I'm going to do 1 and 2, and then double that for about 4 feet. And there's my cutter. Just going to snip that off. And this is where that bead weaving comes into play. The whole beginning part of our project today is a crisscross. It is a 2 needle, even though I'm not using needles, right angle weave really, or a variation of a ladder stitch. If you're familiar with bead weaving, you'll know exactly what I'm doing. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the 8mm rondelle. So I'm going to take my strands here and I'm going to say, okay, these are 10, these are 8, these are 6, and these are 4. Now I can do that pretty well by just looking at them, but if you don't kind of have the eye for what the diameters of the beads are quite yet, you might want to put them in piles with little sticky notes, or with, if you had number beads. I know Michael has some really cute number beads right now. You could put those number beads right next to them. Any kind of a way to look and know what the size is, because it's important when you're doing the design. You can change up your diameters. Sure, it's going to change the length a little bit. But as I was doing this, I was like, well, how can I help people keep it straight, right? Because there are a lot of beads that we're using here, especially a lot of beads that are the same color. So let's start here. I'm going to string 6 8mm rondelles onto the middle of the wire. So we're going to do 1, 2. This is the unglamorous part of beading. 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now what I'm going to do is, like I said, we're going to thread those to the center. So I'm holding my 2 ends here and I have my beads down in the center. I'm going to make a circle, and I'm going to make a circle by passing the wire around and through the first bead that I added. And of course, when I've got all of this stuff going on, things are getting caught all over the place, but that's okay. We're just going to get this into the middle. And you want to be careful with the wire. It is 49 strand wire. So it is less likely to kink than, say, if we were doing this with 7 or 19 strand, but it is still wire. And if you bend it, if you get it knotted up on itself, it's not going to be very happy. So we want our wire to be happy, and we want to make sure that we're working with it. So just be careful and be cognizant as we're doing these crosses that the wire stays in a fluid motion. All right, so we are on, if you're passing on, if you're following along, on step 2. And now I'm going to do step 3. Onto each wire, I'm going to thread 2 6mm rondelles, 1 pearl, and 2 6mm rondelles. So I'm going to use a contrasting color. Actually, I'm going to come and I'm going to use, am I going to use a contrasting color? These rondelles I need more of. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm gonna do a contrasting color so that we can really see what's going on here. So I'm gonna do 2, and then 1 pearl. Where'd my pearls go? And then I'm gonna do 2 more 6mm. And then I'm going to do that very same thing on the second wire. So I'm gonna pick 2, 1 pearl, and 2 6mm. Kathy asks a really good question. She thinks she's curious how I decided between beading wire and string for this project. She asks, will wire drape as nicely as string? It's a really, really good question. Let me make sure I come back to that, Kathy. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that when after I've done some of the instructions on this. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and add an 8mm rondelle. So that same 8mm rondelle that I added before. And I'm going to pass back through. So my wire is coming, the right wire is coming this way. And I'm going to go back through the other way with the other wire. And so I'm going to, once again, very carefully pull everything together. And I have a really nice second circle. Okay, so that is steps 3 and 4. Now for step 5, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 8mm rondelles on one wire. I'm going to add 2 8mm rondelles on the other wire. And then I'm going to take 1 8mm rondelle, put it on one of the wires, does not matter which wire you go with. And then I'm going to come back through with the other wire. And I'm going to tighten that up. So you can see now, and I'm going to just move this back to my working from tray. Try to get a little bit of a tighter focal here without having so much for the camera to focus on. So you can see I have 2 circles of 6 and then 1 circle of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay. And so now I'm going to repeat steps 3 to 5 one time and then repeat steps 3 and 4. And what that's going to do is going to give me 1 more of these and 1 more of these. It's actually going to give me, it's going to give me, you'll see. You'll see. Okay, so let's see. So we're back to the 8mm rondelles and the pearls. So to answer your question of why I chose wire for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is this 49 strand wire really behaves because it is so soft and so 49 strand. It really behaves like a thread would. I chose wire rather than thread because I am using a lot of beads and I'm using a lot of very heavy beads. And I actually want my design to have some structure to it. I don't want it to be drapey and floppy, like if I put it on Wildfire or Fireline or Silk or any of the other threads that are out there. So here I did 2 of those 6 millimeters, 1 pearl, 2 6 millimeters on each one. And then I'm going to go ahead and take that 8 millimeter rondelle and pass it back through. So if I were doing this design with seed beads, with seed pearls, with really light beads, or I was doing it in just a little bit of a different way, I might consider doing it with, hey Wanda, I might consider doing it with thread, but because I wanted a little bit more structure, I wanted to make sure with these heavy beads and these heavy glass beads that I had the strength that I needed to have my necklace hold its shape. Those are all or some of the reasons why I chose to do this project on stringing wire. But a really, really good question. I appreciate you asking it. Okay, so I need one more of the turquoise beads. So I'm going to bring these in. So, and I'm curious for everybody who's watching in the comments, would you, if you were making a design like this, would your first instinct be to use beading wire, or would your first instinct be to use thread? I also really like, especially on a project that is kind of big and bold and heavy like this one, I like being able to crimp it with a crimp bead or a crimp tube. I find that I feel a little bit more secure in doing that as my finishing technique than I would just knotting it and finishing it that way. Okay, so I have gotten to steps 3 and 4 one more time. And now I am ready to do the center component. So if we just kind of isolate the center component here and we look at what we're working with. So we've come down one side. I've done this part here that I'm pointing at with my left thumb. This center compartment takes a little bit of finagling. It's very easy once you know the thread path. And we're going to switch now. We had been working with 8 and 6 millimeter beads. Now we are going to be using the 10 millimeters, the biggest beads on that card. And I'm actually going to switch and use, let's see, should I use gray or black? I'm going to use black and bring these black beads in just for contrast, so we can really see what's going on, because there's kind of a funky thread path that's happening. So we're going to add 3 of the 10 millimeters onto one. Doesn't matter which one, just choose one and add 1, 2, 3. And then on the other wire, I'm going to add 2. So again, these are the 10 millimeter beads that I'm using. And I put 3 on one. Let me just move that up just a scoosh. 3 on one and 2 on the other. Okay, now we talked about those cute little heart beads that I showed in the beginning. I'm going to grab one of those little heart beads, and I am going to add the heart bead from the top to the bottom. So we'll look at our heart. Obviously, the heart has a top and the bottom. So I'm going to string it onto the thread that has the 3 beads. Okay, so one that has the 3 beads, that's the one I'm using. And I'm going to go top to bottom. And it's important to do it this way because you want the heart to end up being aligned the right way, top to bottom. If you want them upside down, you can do them a different way. I love when people ask good questions, especially when they are just starting out, because that's how you learn, right? I have done all of this by trial and error. So the more I can help somebody along their beading journey without having to go through the error part, but it's so good to ask questions and what if questions, because what if questions are the best kind of questions because they make you think about things in ways that you might not have before. Okay, so where was I? Okay, right. Okay, so I have 3 beads on one side. I just want to make sure I'm getting my thread paths right. So I'm double checking. And I'm going to take the thread or the wire. Now you've got me thinking thread. Taking the wire that has the 2 beads on it, and I'm going to pass that wire back up through that heart bead. So I'm coming back up through that heart bead. And I'm going to pull tight. Okay. Not too tight. Tension is a very important thing when you're beading. And depending on what you're making, right? It's always hard to give definitive answers when we're talking about creating. But depending on what you're making, you have to vary your tension, right? So because I am making this type of design, I want it to be taut, but not tight. I don't want to tighten it up so much that it starts curling up on itself, but I don't want there to be any gaps in the wire or gaps in my design either. Okay, so now keep losing my spot when I'm talking. I just want to make sure I'm getting all of my thread path correctly. Okay, so now you want to see where these 3 beads are. This is going to be the top or the inside of the necklace. So that becomes important as we're going along because our necklace has kind of a dip down here. It has a V shape to it. And the part, it's a little counterintuitive, but the heart that has this, I'm sorry, the wire or the part that has the 3 beads, that's now the top of our necklace. So now we're going to go to the bottom wire. And onto the bottom wire, we're stringing 4 rondelles. So we've got 4 rondelles here. And you don't have to do them 4 at a time the way I do. We're just in the interest of time. So I've strung 4 rondelles. I'm going to grab a heart bead and I'm going to string that heart bead from bottom to top this time. So the first one we did from top to bottom. This time we're going from bottom to top. And then I need 1 more 10mm rondelle. All right, so now this is where it gets a little tricky. It's not really that tricky. You just have to pay attention. What we're going to do is we're going to take this wire. Let me get this centered a little bit better. We're going to take this wire and we're going to go through that heart bead that we already strung on here. And we're going to go all the way back through the 4 rondelles and this heart. Okay? We can do it. And that's also why you don't want or need this to be super tight right away, because you do need a little bit of room to get that wire back through. So I just went through that heart bead. I'm going to come back through those 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 rondelles, and also the heart bead that I not just strung. This guy here, he's just hanging out. He is just hanging out. And I want to get this all nice and snugged up together. But but I don't quite have to worry about everything being so tight quite yet, because the next step, oh, and I should have warned everybody, whenever I'm teaching a class, I always mention which part is the hardest part. This is the hardest part. It's not that hard. Okay. So now I have just been working with this wire here, right? I'm going to come back to the wire that's just been hanging out. And that wire that's just been hanging out, I'm going to thread it through that rondelle that was just hanging out. So if that part was a little confusing to you, if you're like, Meredith, what is going on with those thread paths? I have no idea what you just did. It was super confusing. Just give yourself a minute, refer to the instructions, think about it intuitively, where those heart beads will end up. And somehow, look at what I did. Somehow one of my hearts is down and one of my hearts is up. I don't know how I did that. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take it out and figure out what I did wrong. Because that's what you do when you are beading and you're working with instructions and you've tested them this morning to make sure that they worked. I can attest to the fact that I tested this morning and my hearts are both the right way. So I did something wrong. So let's figure out what it was. All right. Just going to back this out. And again, because I'm using wire, I'm being careful when I'm backing this out. I don't want it to get all kinked up, but it's thick enough that it's giving myself some good tension. And I realized what I did. The instruction, isn't this coming out? The instruction says, something is caught here. Yep. Oh my goodness. That's what happens when it's so hot in the basement. The instruction says from bottom to top. But now I did top to bottom. And that's what happens when you don't do it the right way. So I'm going to go back around, just like I had mentioned before. Come back through that top bead. I'm going to go back through those 4 beads again. And not one person caught me. There you go. All right. I saw in the comments now. Paula caught it. Sometimes I do build mistakes in to see if people are paying attention and also to teach a lesson. This was not one of those times. I will admit that. I did not build that in on purpose. I promise. I would tell you if I did, but that one I did not build in on purpose. Oh, and you know what? Oh my goodness gracious. All right, I just need to take a moment. Sorry, friends. I had already transferred that bead onto the other wire. So I told you this was the hardest part, right? Wasn't fooling about that. But with any beading, that's all you need to do. You just kind of have to take a beat, take a moment, say, wait, something doesn't look right. How is it that just something went a little bit awry, and you just have to take it out, kind of take a deep breath and figure out how to fix the mistake, right? And then how to go on. So I'm just going to, now that I have figured everything out, I am back on the straight and narrow. And I apologize. I thought that errant heart would be a little bit easier to get back the right way. But you can see how important, especially when you are doing a design with directional beads, how important it is to make sure that the direction is going the right way. All right. Back on track here, no problem. Now, now that my hearts are both facing the right direction, I'm going to take that last one, the one that's on the right, and pull it through the top. And now I'm ready to go again. And everything should, because the holes in these beads are big enough, and because I'm using 0.018 wire, I should have enough room to get everything nice and nice and nice and snug. And I want to make sure that I don't forget on step 10, not only do I need to go through that 10mm rondelle, but I also need to make sure that I go through that heart bead and only that heart bead so that my thread is exiting the heart bead. So I'm going to pause here, let everybody see how that thread path is. I'm going to take a quick drink. Because you can see one thread or one wire is coming out of the bottom of the heart bead and one wire is coming out of the top. So now that top and bottom becomes important. Remember how we talked about a couple minutes ago, the 3 beads here, that's the top or the inside of our necklace. 2 beads is the bottom. So on that top, that same top wire, I'm going to thread on 3 beads. And again, we're still working with those 10mm. And onto the bottom, we're going to do 2. 1 and 2. And you can now really see this is the center. And now I'm working backwards to make a mirror of what I had done previously. So once again, 1 8mm rondelle. I'm going to come one way with one wire, back the other way with the other wire. Okay, and now I've realized that this step I did with that bead and this step I did with this bead. So I'm actually going to change this out to that green bead because I want to make sure that it is a mirror. That is an 8mm rondelle, not a 10mm. The instructions are correct. I misspoke and I apologize. Because again, and you can see very, very clearly what we're doing is we're making a mirror here and a mirror on the other side. So now all I need to do is reverse all of those steps. So I have this section, this section, this section, and so forth all the way till the end. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do it a little bit quicker than I did on the other side, just because we need to get to the next step. Now, I did mention, or I did ask for and receive an hour and a half for this class. So when you signed up, I hope that you noticed that it is an hour and a half rather than our traditional hour-long class. So if you can't join us for the whole time, I understand. I hope that you will be able to. And then if you are watching on YouTube and you need to pause or come back and watch later on, that's perfectly acceptable. But I'm going to do the same steps in reverse. So on one side, I have 2 8mm beads, 1 pearl, 2 8mm beads. And we're gonna do 2 8mm beads, 1 pearl, and 2 8mm beads. And I realized that this morning when I was making my sample, I used the 8mm beads that I would need for today. So I'm just going to snip that apart so I can use the 8mm beads over here. So I want to use all of my contrasting colors. I liked the way it looked monochromatic. I liked the way it looked with 2 contrasting colors, and I'm kind of digging how it looks with the 3 different colors as well. So I will leave that design up to designer's choice for sure for how you want to choose your colors for your design. Okay. I feel like my beads have gotten scattered all over the place. I tried to keep everything all organized, and despite all of my best efforts, it never seems to work that way, right? Nothing ever seems to stay organized on your beading spot. So 2 on one, 2 on the other, and 1 in between. And this technique, this cross needle, this 2 needle right angle weave or ladder stitch variation, is really, really versatile. And it's used in a lot of different applications. It's used as a basis for right angle weave when you're doing bead weaving. It's used as a basis for cubic right angle weave if you want to get super fancy. The ladder stitch is a base for brick stitch and all kinds of different seed bead weaving. And you can use it for stringing with large beads as well. So it really is very, very versatile when it comes to how you can use it after you've learned the basic technique. Okay, moving right along here. When I tested this morning, the pattern, I was just double checking and making sure the timing. And I actually did this whole part of the necklace, start to finish, or start here to finish on the other side in 20 minutes. So once you get it and once you get going, it's a really, really pretty quick technique. But of course, stopping and starting and doing all of the instructions always takes a little bit longer. But once you get that first half, once you get that first side, it's just a question of repeating it. So I need to make one more repeat, and then we'll be all set with this part of our necklace. And this would be great as a bracelet foundation. It would be great. Let's see what else. If you, again, using those great multi-sized cards of all different colors they have now at Michael's, you can really make some fabulous designs. I know Sarah Lovecraft, who also does classes on Beadalon's behalf for the Michael's Community Classroom. That's one of her definite go-tos for designing. And they're great because you always need all the different sizes. I always needing 4, 6, 8, and or 10 millimeter rondelles for lots and lots of different projects. And I want to make sure that I have some good tension, like I mentioned before, not too tight, but just tight enough that I don't have any gaps in there. Okay, so I'm coming to the end here, and I am now on step 12. I've repeated steps 3 to 6 to mirror the first side of the necklace. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to string 3, and here there is a little error in the instructions. It's actually 8 millimeter rondelles. I wrote 6 millimeter rondelles, and I apologize for that. I got kind of carried away with my 6s and my 8s, I guess. But here we want to, of course, mirror the first part. So we're using 8s. So I'm going to do 3 on one side, and then 2 on the other. And now I need a crimp tube because we are going to crimp this to finish it off. If I was using thread, I could knot it. But once again, because I'm using the beading wire, because I want it to have a little bit more strength and a little bit more durability, I'm going to use a crimp tube. Now, crimp tubes, let's do it like that. Crimp tubes are these little teeny tiny tubes of metal. And I'm going to put I'm going to put it on one of the wires. And then just like I've been doing before, I'm going to cross the wire through it. Okay, that's where my crimp tube is going to be. So I have my wire crossed through. And just to make things nice and neat, I'm going to go back through that one bead on one side and one bead on the other side. It's just kind of good practice to get into when you are doing any kind of crimping, is to make sure that you have the ends of your wires kind of going back through a couple of the beads. And now, because I'm using a crimp tube number 2, and the reason why I'm using a crimp tube number 2 is because my wire tells me right here what size I need. If I was using crimp beads, it would be a number 1, and since I'm using crimp tubes, it's a number 2. And if you are new today and you've never made jewelry before and you're like, oh my gosh, Meredith, what are you talking about? I highly encourage you to go to the video called 5 Things You Should Never Do While Making Beaded Jewelry on the Michaels YouTube, or the Michaels Community Classroom YouTube page or YouTube part. And it will go over everything soup to nuts about bead stringing wire and crimping and everything that you need to know. But crimping is a 3-step process. I'm going into it when I say that, right? And the crimp tool has 2 notches. You can see the top notch is smooth, and the back notch has a little bit of a dimple to it. We're going to go first in that top notch, then in the back notch, and then back to the top notch. Okay, so first things first, I'm coming in that top notch and I'm gently squeezing. No death grips here. Then I'm coming back. I've made my circle into an oval. And I'm going to come back in the back notch of my pliers, and I'm going to turn that oval into a jelly bean. It's a little tough to see because it's in between those 2 beads there, but you have to trust me, I've made a jelly bean. And now I'm going to move my tool around and around and around and around so that I have a nice curved, smooth crimp tube. Okay, then I'm going to come here and I'm going to snip off the wire here, and I'm going to snip off the wire here. And now part 1 is complete. Okay, and now we need to move on to part 2. Okay, I think we can do it in the next 40 minutes. I'm going to move part 1 off to the side because for part 2, what we need to do is we need to do some links. I've already prepared one. We're going to do one together. And those links are going to consist of 8mm heart, 8mm heart, and 8mm. So I'm going to grab 3 8mm. I'm going to grab 2 hearts. I'm going to grab some 20 gauge artistic wire. This is dead soft wire. I happen to have one right here that's already opened. And this is tarnish resistant silver. It is copper core wire with a tarnish resistant, that's silver plated and has a tarnish resistant coating. And we're going to do some loops. First things first, when the wire comes off of the spool, I'm going to move this up so I have a little bit more room to work. I like to use my nylon jaw pliers just to give it a little straighten. I'm going to pull off about, I don't know, 7 or so inches. And the 3 tools that you need to make loops are a round nose plier, a chain nose plier, and a cutter. Okay. So first things first, and quick disclaimer, people do their wrapped loops many different ways. This is how I do mine. If this technique doesn't work so well for you, I definitely recommend checking out somebody else's technique because it might work better for you. So I'm going to look and I'm going to take about it's measuring. I almost always just eyeball this, but I'm going to take about a centimeter and I'm going to bend it down at a 90-degree angle. I find for me, when I measure, it actually trips me up. It is harder for me to make simple loops when I measure. So just keep that in mind. Now what I want to do is I'm going to hold this at the very, very end with my round nose pliers. And when you make a simple loop, everything needs to be at very specific and hard right angles. So my wrist isn't like down here. It's not up here. It's not kind of over here. I've got my wrist parallel with the table and my wire is perpendicular to the table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll my wrist counterclockwise. So I'm going to roll, but once I can't roll anymore, I'm going to reposition and I'm going to gently coax that loop over. And sometimes it needs a little squeeze. It's not the best loop I've ever done, but that's what happens when you do them really slow. And now I have a loop. Okay, we're going to do that many, many more times together. So I'm going to put a bead on. We're going to do the second part. So again, I'm going to take those chain nose pliers. I'm going to bend my wire down at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to eyeball where I'm going to cut it. I'm going to come here on the end. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. I'm going to roll around. That one works out a lot better. Like when my loops are pretty. All right, one down, many more to go. I'm going to take that same scrap of wire. I'm going to bend down at a 90-degree angle. And look, that one didn't work at all because my area here that I cut was way too long. So you know what I do when that happens? Snip it off and try again. The takeaway message is that wrap loops can be very, very easy or very challenging. The more you practice, the better that you will get at them. They're also very forgiving. And so you should forgive yourself if and when you are challenged by making simple loops. But the key to simple loops like this is just practice, practice, practice. The second key to making simple loops is to get, well, how do I not have a Sharpie in my studio down here? Is to take a Sharpie and make a mark right across where you want that loop to start. Okay, and then I always like to give a little squeeze afterwards. And now I'm going to link these two together. So to do that, I'm going to lift my loop toward myself. I'm going to slide my second loop in, and I'm going to close that loop back up. So now we're on to our third skill, right? We did that right angle, two needle right angle weave. We learned how to crimp. And now we are moving on to wire work. This is the week of jewelry making. So learning all of the skills that we need to make jewelry is really important. And that's why I love this project, because there are so many different skills that are needed. And you'll see as I made that bend, but I'm going to trim it a little bit because it was a little bit too long for me. I think it's still a little long. And again, I'm holding it right on the end. I'm rolling my wrist, and then I'm kind of coming back and making sure that my loop is a good loop. I'm gonna open that up. Oop. And you can do it like this, right? I haven't put my other bead on yet, but I've linked it. Now we're in the groove, right? Susie says, simple loops should be called devil loops. They never seem to be simple. I tend to agree with you, Susie. If given the choice, I will actually do a wrapped loop. I opted not to do wrapped loops for this project. You could certainly do wrapped loops for this project. I don't know. I kind of went back and forth on that. And then I was like, you know what? I think that wrapped loops are the second most important thing to learn. I like learning wrapped loops and teaching wrapped loops first. Maybe that's because of how I learned it. But on my Wednesday class, if you haven't signed up for it yet, on Wednesday, I am going to be teaching a really, really fun purse charm or backpack tassel. It is adorable. And in that project, we are going to be doing a lot of wrapped loops and simple loops. Are we going to do anything else? I'm trying to think what else is involved in that project. I think it's just simple loops and wrap loops and joining everything together. A lot of jump ring work, but a super, super cute and fun project. And I keep, oh, here it is. I know I keep. So I'm going to show one different way of making a simple loop. And this might appeal to you more. I learned the way I do it, but this is another fun way. So no bend first, right? We're just going to take this in the very end of our pliers and bend it over to make a P, okay? And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to break its neck. I'm going to hold it against my thumb and I'm going to break its neck. Just a little bit of a different way of making a loop. So let me do that one more time. Oh, and I bent it down already. I think that the reason why I do it this way is because on that second bend, I think it's a little bit easier than the neck breaking part. But I love teaching people different ways of doing things because then you know what clicks for you, what kind of makes sense in your brain. Okay, so we need two of these. Luckily, through the magic of preparing for class this morning, I have two right here. So that's part two. We've done part one, which is this part here. I've now done part two, which is this part here. And now we need to do part three. And what part three is we're going to take two more pieces of wire and we're going to cut two pieces of wire about 10 centimeters. I'm sorry, 10 centimeters, 10 inches long. And onto those wires, we're going to string on 40 of the 4mm rondelles. So I've got 40 of the 4mm rondelles here. And I'm going to get that started to show you what we're going to do. So I'm going to cut this off. And before I string on anything, we're going to do some crimping again. I'm going to have that crimp bead and I'm going to introduce you to my favorite friend in all of beading, and that is a wire guardian. So a wire guardian is a little horseshoe shaped piece of metal. that serves as a ready-made distance between your crimp tube and your clasp. It also gives a little bit of extra abrasion resistance against anything that's happening, any movement in your design. And I also just think that they look nice. So I'm going to put on a crimp tube. I'm going to string on my wire guardian. I'm going to go up, around, and through that wire guardian. I'm not going to worry about any clasp. I'm not going to worry about any, about attaching anything to this right now. That comes with a jump ring later on. But what I am going to do, let's move this out of the way, is I'm going to come with my chain nose pliers and very gently squeeze those ends together. And then I'm going to do that same crimping technique that I did before. So we're going to see it a lot better now. I've got my crimp tool, top rounded, back has a little dimple in it. I'm going to come in. I'm going to make sure that my wires are not crossed. And I'm going to squeeze down in that very first channel. Then I'm going to come back to the back channel and I'm going to squeeze down to make that jelly bean shape. Then I'm going to turn this perpendicular up and down, and I'm going to come back to that front channel and I'm going to squeeze again. And I'm going to round and round and round and round and round and round so that my crimp is nice and secure. I always like to give a little tug to make sure that I did a good job. So you never need to squeeze this anymore. You never need to give it any more oomph to it. Everything is calibrated to work in conjunction and be happy together. So let me see, where did here we go. So now what you're going to do is start stringing on to this wire, those 4mm beads. And you're going to go ahead and string 40. Okay, and just keep going until you have 40 on there. Okay. And I've already done that. I have my wire guardian here. Everything is strung up. So now I'm ready to do the second side. So I'm going to take another crimp tube, another wire guardian, and on the other side, I'm going to go, oops, certainly don't want to forget to put my crimp tube on, just making sure everybody's paying attention, right? Putting on my crimp tube, then my wire guardian, up, around and through. And here, just like we did on the end of the necklace portion, I'm going to thread back through about 4 of those beads, okay, to hide my tail. I also want to make sure that over here on the first side, that my tail is tucked in to those beads. So I know my tail is tucked in here. I'm going to pull everything. And I want to make sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room in here, that these beads can move around. I don't want it so tight that there's no room for those beads to dance. I'm going to come here again and just very ever so gently bring the ends of that wire guardian together. Not everybody does that step, but I feel like it's really important because if you don't bring your wire guardian ends together, they can get a little scratchy. In this design, it doesn't really matter so much, but they tend to, I don't know, when they're not wrangled together, they tend, oops, I went to the back first. All right. They tend to get a little unwieldy. We don't want them catching on anything. So I always say crimping is a 3-step process, but you can tell that it's been an hour into class because I just went for it. I went right to the back of the jaw instead of doing the front, but it's front, back, and then front again. And then with this tail, I'm going to come in and I am going to snip it off. And try to get as close as I can to the strung portion. And now time to put everything together. So I'm going to put my beads out of the way. All of the extra beads that I was designing with. Oh, and just incidentally, I did not mention this little guy. This is a wire guardian. I'm a wire guardian, a bead stopper. And what these bead stoppers do is you use them on the ends of your beads to make sure that they don't fall off when you're transporting beads, when you are trying to figure out your sizing. There's nothing worse than working so hard on a design and then picking it up and having it fall apart. So wire guardians are a great way to make sure that that doesn't happen. All right, so I've got my necklace part here. I have my 2 wire parts, and then I have my 2 strung parts. And so I need to put all of those together and add a little bit more embellishment to make our final piece. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves some jump rings. I have a bunch of jump rings right here. I'm just going to put them out. And really quickly before we get started, I just want to mention the proper way to open and close a jump ring. I've got 2 pliers. Here I have a flat nose plier and a chain nose plier. Any flat plier will do. You could use a bent chain nose for this. You could use 2 of one. But you want to hold the jump ring on one side and grip it on the other side and twist. Okay, so it's a twisting motion. It is not an opening motion. It is a twisting motion to open. And then when you close it, you twist it until you hear that little click and you know that it's nice and closed together. So let's go ahead and start adding some things. So we're going to attach the 2 strands of beads. So here's one strand, here's the other, and we are going to attach them between the pearl and the 6mm rondelle on the second pearl circle on each side of the necklace. All right, that's a lot of words. So let's figure out where we're going. So we're going to the second pearl circle, and we're going between the pearl and the 6mm rondelle. So right here is where it's going to be. So in between the pearl and the rondelle on it's really the middle, if you want to think about it. I've said the second, but the middle could be more helpful. So I'm going to take my jump ring. I'm going to thread it through that wire guardian. And I'm going to come in here. And this is another reason why you want to make sure that things aren't too tight, because I need to get a little purchase in here. And it might take a try or two. I need to get a little purchase in here to get around that wire. Let's put that down just a skosh. Okay, and now I'm going to come here and close that jump ring up. I love when everything starts coming together. Okay. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So everything is a mirror here, right? I'm not worrying about this part yet. I'm going to take another jump ring. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to thread it through the wire guardian. And then I'm going to come in here in between that 6mm and the pearl on the middle. oops, I'm so sorry, I went out of frame, on the middle part of that side. And I'm gonna get that nice and snugged up together. Okay. All right. So we're just gonna let those hang out for a second. And if you are making a center part like this is what we're building right now. So here I have a feather. I have a segment right here that has a 6mm heart, another 6mm, and a loop on the top. So I'm going to use a different charm here on the bottom, but I'm going to build this part right here, and I'm going to attach my charm. So to do that, I'm going to do the exact same thing, exact same technique as before. I'm going to take my 20 gauge wire, and 20 gauge wire is really my go-to for these kinds of joins. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and make a wrap loop. Why not, right? Just so that we have all of our skills all together in this one class. So I'm going to bend over at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to take my round nose pliers. I'm going to put it right against that bend. I'm going to come over top, and I'm going to bend that down at about 45-degree angle that way. I'm going to replace my pliers so that the loop is now over the bottom. I'm going to pull that wire toward myself. I'm going to push it away from myself. I'm going to pull it toward myself, push it away, pull it toward. Okay. Wrapped loop. I like to give my wrapped loops a little squeezy squeeze. And I'm going to snip that away. And the most important thing about a wrapped loop is you want to make sure that you tuck your tail in. You don't want any tails. And a really good way to do that, so this little aside, is to use that round portion of your crimping pliers to tuck your tail in. We're learning all the skills today. Okay, so now I need a 4mm, I'm sorry, a 6mm, a heart, and another 6mm. And I'm going to go ahead and make another wrap loop at the top here. And I'm just going to hold my pliers, my round nose pliers, at the top of that bead, bend it over the top, about a 45-degree angle, pull it back over toward myself, replace the loop from the top of the pliers to the bottom of the pliers, switch my hands, pull that tail around toward myself, and then push it away from myself, pull it toward myself, push it away, pull it toward. So now we've learned 2-needle right angle weave. We've learned crimping. We've learned simple loops, and we've learned a wrap loop. Armed with those skills, you can make a lot of different kinds of jewelry. All right, so now what I need to do is I need to connect this all together. And one of the challenges, and sometimes where you have to get creative in jewelry making, is figuring out how to connect stuff together. So I've got 2 jump rings. It's very hard to say. A jump ring here, a loop here, a jump ring here, a jump ring here. Okay. You might think of a different or better way of doing this, but this is how I decided to connect everything together. I have a jump ring here, a jump ring here, and a jump ring here, all 3 coming through the center loop. Lots of different ways to do this. Like I said, this is kind of the one that I chose. So we're just going to take a bunch of jump rings and link everything together. Once again, with my 2 pliers, I'm going to open that jump ring. I'm going to pull, actually, I'm going to do this one first. I'm going to put that wrapped loop through. And then I'm going to attach this in between those four beads. So I've got two on one side and two on the other, and like just like before, sometimes this part can be a little fiddly. You just have to kind of zhuzh it in there with your fingers, show those beads who's boss. Close that up. And now got to do some more attaching together. So I'm going to open this jump ring. I'm going to thread it through my wire guardian. I'm going to thread it through my wrapped loop. Close my jump ring, and then I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing on the other side. I am digging all these different colors. It's a very the design itself is a little bit of a diversion from my usual style. And I like that. I like being challenged and challenging myself to do different things. Okay. We did that. And then I want to, where was the charm that I wanted to, ooh, how fun are these, right? This is the part number there. I love when I find things at Michael's and then I buy them and then I'm like, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do with them. And then all of a sudden it's like the absolute perfect thing for a project. And today I've rediscovered these crystals and I was like, that is absolutely the perfect thing for this project because the colors go right and it gives a little bit of a different vibe than that flower or that feather pendant does. But I'm really digging that crystal. All right, so we've got two more steps to do. We've got to attach these guys, and I'm realizing now that I did I made these just a little too short. I need one more link on both sides. So I'm just going to go ahead and find my wire and do that really quickly. It's funny when there are so many steps to a project. Even when I prepped this morning, there were a lot of it's a lot to be done. So I'm going to just very quickly add one more. And I just did something that I always tell people to never ever do. I don't know if anybody who watches the who watches my classes notice that. One thing that I am noticing, however, is that to find my heart beads. They're eluding me. And I love the heart beads for this project, but I think there are so many different colorways, so many different variations, so many different ways that you can make this project your own. And that's what I really like about it. It's one of my favorite things about a project, especially a class like this for the Michael's Community Classroom, is that you learn the technique, right? And then you make it your own. Either with a different colorway or with different materials. You could do it all in pearls. You could do it all in crystals. You could do it all in gemstones. Gosh, that would be beautiful, wouldn't it? Or choose different colorways of these amazing Rondelle beads. I think we have all agreed in the comments that we love the Rondelle beads. funny, we just came out with a whole bunch of new tools for at Beadalon. And one of the things that I always get asked is like, why so many tools? Why do I need so many tools, Meredith? But I have, no less than 6 tools right here next to me that I keep reaching for again and again. Okay, so now we're going to connect this on this side. So once again, I need jump ring. Susie, I knew that you would check me. I knew it. Like I said, sometimes I put those little Easter eggs in to see if people are paying attention. Okay, and so this one, I'm going to attach it on the outer, the second one in here, right in between these 2 bottom beads. You can attach it somewhere else if that strikes your fancy. This is always the one that I'm like, okay, there we go. And just a little wiggle back and forth. And then this is going to come in between these 2 beads right here. So on the first round here, in between the 2 6mm beads, or somewhere else of your choosing. That's just where I chose to do it. Okay, coming down the home stretch. You're going to repeat that on the other side to have that same loop over here. But I want us to show the finishing part here up top. And to do that, I'm going to use a little bit of chain, and I'm going to size the necklace, figure out how long I want it to be to fit me perfectly. And then I'm going to cut a piece of chain to that length. And here I'm just going to guesstimate. And I'm going to cut a piece of chain. I'm going to do 6 inches. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut that chain in half. So I have 2 pieces that are equal. And sometimes you only have to do 1 length, but in this case, I had to cut 2 lengths. So this is our, gosh, I don't even know how many jewelry making skills we're up to now. Adding a length of chain. So once again, my trusty jump rings come into play. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to add some chain, and then I'm going to add it so that I have 3 beads on the bottom and 2 beads on the top. And then once again, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Open this up, add the chain, 3 beads on the bottom, 2 beads, or on the outside if it's easier to think about it that way. 2 beads on the inside. Wiggle back and forth. And then the last thing that I need to do is add a clasp. So any clasp of your choosing, I'm just going to add a simple lobster claw with, you guessed it, a jump ring. Open up my jump ring, add my lobster claw, add it to the outside chain. And if you wanted to, you could make 1 chain longer so that it's actually an extension chain. So you could make 1 4 inches and 1, 6 inches and have a dangle down the back. That would be a really nice way to finish off the design. And I do need to add 2 more links here. And then I would mirror that the same way on the other side. But let's bring our original necklace back in here for a second and just talk about a couple more things to do to finish off your design. Because I have, just like I just did, this one is attached over here. And then here I have this one attached over here. And then to finish it off, all I did was add, once again, with a jump ring, a little charm, just right onto one of those loops, close it up on one side. And then the same thing on the other side. I just added a charm right to one of those loops. So I could add more charms if I wanted to. Like I said, I love the way that this feather looks here, but I also really like the way that the crystal finished this one off. So same necklace, same instructions, a little bit of a different look for how it's finished off. Oh my goodness, that was quite the class. Nicole, I think we're ready to flip that camera around. You have been a very good sport behind the scenes, and I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who stuck around. There was a lot in that class. That was a full hour and a half of lots of different skills. But if you go back in a couple, about 24 to 48 hours and watch on the replay on the Michael's YouTube channel, if you're still here with me, rewind, pause, fast forward, get a little clarity on some of the skills, but we went over all of the things, the basics that you need to know as you are starting your jewelry making journey. Please go ahead and sign up for my class on Wednesday. It's a really, really fun charm for either a backpack or a purse or even a necklace. It's just really, it's all the dangle do's. We're going to practice loops, simple loops and wrapped loops until the day is over. And it's a really, really fun class. Also, don't forget to check out all of the other amazing classes that the instructors have put together for the week of jewelry making for the Michael's Community Classroom. I've taught a lot of skills. I think it's time for a break for all of us. On behalf of Beadalon and Artistic Wire, and of course, Michael's in the Community Classroom, I'm Meredith Roddy from Beadalon and Artistic Wire. I am so glad that you all hung out with me today. Thank you very much. I saw all of your comments and they made my heart smile. So I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And until next time, happy beading.